Good evening. Thank you for joining us this evening for Lupus Canada's Disease Awareness webinar. Tonight, Dr. Peschken will be addressing what's happening in lupus research. Dr. Peschken is a professor in the Department of Medicine and Community Health Sciences, Max Rady College of Medicine, Rady Faculty of Health Sciences, University of Manitoba. I apologize, I have to read that because that's quite lengthy. Dr. Peschken established the University of Manitoba Lupus Clinic at the Health Science Center in Winnipeg in 2002. Dr. Peschken is an established investigator in outcomes in SLE with special emphasis on and expertise in health disparities in vulnerable populations with lupus. She is a member of the Systematic Lupus International Collaborating Clinics and is the chair of CANYOS. Just a few housekeeping items to address before we begin. Please note all attendees are placed in listen-only mode, so your audio and video are disabled. Should you have a question, please post it in the chat box and we will do our best to address the questions at the end of the presentation. We hope you'll find this webinar informative. I'm now going to pass this over to Ariana Ranjabar as she is the moderator for this evening. Ariana?
Thank you, Leanne. Yes, so I'll be your moderator for tonight. If you have any questions throughout, please put it in the chat box. If it's urgent, I will address it to Dr. Peschken, or if it's something that can wait till the Q&A, I'll wait and address it later. And yes, so thank you. And I will now pass it on to Dr. Peschken. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
All right. Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for taking the time out of your evenings to come to this. And I hope that it is of interest to you. And now the technology, there we go. Okay, so there's quickly my disclosures. And so really, I thought I'd start with just a little bit of a preamble on research in general. It really is like trying to put together a humongous jigsaw puzzle. You can't even see the whole picture at the beginning. You can't even see all the pieces. And it's really hard to see how they're going to fit or how big the puzzle actually is. And so when we're working on something, we're really working on one piece at a time, one little piece, and trying to see how it fits into the whole. I suspect this audience is really quite aware of how complicated lupus is. We know that there are genetic factors, there's environmental factors, and environmental here includes everything that a person might be exposed to. There are hormonal and epigenetic factors that all come together to cause lupus, either at the same time or one after another. So with all of these factors that are going to be different from one person to the next, it's really not surprising that lupus looks different from one person to the next. So it's very complicated to figure out. There's so many different aspects to study. There's a lot of different puzzle pieces, and they can seem very far removed from each other, that it's really hard to know how they're going to fit in and how one piece might connect to the other. So really the complexity of lupus means that multi-center studies are really, and collaboration is really what we need. Almost all lupus studies are done with multiple different sites working together across the country or across the world. I'm going to take this moment here and put in a plug for Lupus Canada. Lupus Canada has been supporting the Canadian Lupus Network, and that's CANYOS, Canadian Network for Improved Outcomes in Systemic Lupus. That's a long name. They've been supporting us for longer than I've been around, so someone else can probably tell you the exact, but it's more than 20 years. And that has really helped us to participate in clinical trials and other studies of lupus. So I just wanted to thank Lupus Canada for that and emphasize how important it is that we do these studies collaboratively. When you, as I said, we're looking at all these different pieces and there's so many aspects. We could be looking at the genetics of lupus, symptom management, measurement. This might be a funny area, but if we want to study something, we have to know how to measure it. Prevention, pathogenesis, comorbidity, damage, and of course, treatment. So we're still trying to look at all of these, including epidemiology, which is who gets lupus and how often and when. So it really, there's no way I could cover everything. There's research going on in all of these areas all across the world, including in Canada. So I've just picked a couple of areas that I hope will be of interest, and we'll focus on those. I'm hoping that there will be questions later, particularly if there's something you were hoping to hear about that I didn't cover. So, new lupus treatments. This is very exciting. We are in an unprecedented area or time for lupus treatments right now. So going back 60 years, I think hydroxychloroquine was approved for lupus in 1955. And then there was nothing approved for lupus until 2011, which was Belimumab, which is already 11 years ago now. So that's really not very much. It's not that we don't use other drugs, but they haven't been specifically studied and given a lupus indication. It used to be we would go to lupus meetings and we would kind of sit in a corner somewhere and there wasn't a lot of excitement or interest. And now lupus is actually often a real focus of the meeting because there's so much going on in lupus treatment and in lupus overall. So, after 60 years of not very much, in the last year, we've had 2 new drugs that have been approved. Another has a new indication, and there's a bunch more in the pipeline. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time and actually talk about some of these new drugs. First, I'm going to talk about Belimumab. Now, that is the one that was approved in 2011. So at this point, it is newish, not new. It is a human monoclonal antibody to BLYS. Strange name, I know. BLYS stands for B lymphocyte stimulator. BLYS contributes to autoantibody production. So we know that autoantibodies like the anti-nuclear antibody, double-stranded DNA antibody, and all of the other ones are a hallmark of lupus and contribute to disease in lupus. This drug helps to block that autoantibody production. As I said, it's been approved for more than 10 years. We do not have very good access in Canada. I will take a moment to whine about that. We have a complicated approval process. Belimumab is not covered by most public formularies. It is approved, but we don't have good payment methods. And I'm going to talk about that more in a little bit. What is newer about Belimumab is that we now have long-term extension studies, both randomized or controlled and observational studies. For a new drug, when we get a new study or a new drug initially, we only have information that's short-term information about how well it works and who it works in. We now have these long-term studies that really show, first of all, that has a really good safety profile, very low side effect profile, very well tolerated. And it clearly helps to reduce prednisone dose over time, often in people who were never able to come off or reduce their dose. It's good for lupus arthritis and lupus skin rashes. It has been clearly proven to prevent permanent damage to organs like kidneys, skin scarring, heart, and lungs. And it's shown to prevent flare-ups of lupus, which is all related. And I think one of the things that is also very important is that for a lot of patients, it really helps with fatigue. We know that lupus fatigue is a very stubborn, difficult symptom to manage, and most of our drugs don't do much for it. This one, it doesn't help for everybody, but for many patients, it really does. So this is important sort of news about a slightly older drug. So the other thing that's exciting is that it has now just been approved specifically for kidney lupus rather than for lupus in general. So in kidney lupus, it is added to standard treatment for people with kidney involvement and has been shown to improve overall disease activity, again, allow us to reduce prednisone dose, to prevent flare-ups in the kidney, and to improve remission rates. Kidney remission rates means when the kidney goes into remission, it means all of the kidney functions go back to normal, which of course is what we're trying to achieve. and it helps to preserve normal kidney function. So that, of course, is also very important. And Belimumab is given either as a monthly intravenous infusion or as a weekly subcutaneous injection, a self-injection, like an insulin shot, except only once a week. So it's been approved by Health Canada, as I said, both for lupus and more recently for kidney lupus. We hope it's now going back to the body that helps to, that needs to approve it to get it onto public formularies. We are hoping that this new indication is going to be another kick at the can for us in Canada to get proper public reimbursement for it. This process, going to the Common Drug Review, is happening in the next few months, and we are hoping that the outcome will be positive. I think the signs are positive, so we need to keep our fingers and toes crossed that this is going to become a realistic option here in Canada. So another new treatment is called anifrolumab. And by the way, I do not know who names these drugs or how they come up with some of these names. I can tell you the MAB at the end of them stands for monoclonal antibody. Like Belimumab, this is a human monoclonal antibody to type 1 interferon receptor. Interferons are a group of cytokines that are very involved in the pathogenesis or the development of lupus. It's another example of something we call targeted biological therapy, or sometimes it's just called biological therapy. These treatments act on specific molecular targets that are associated with the disease you're trying to treat. That's different from standard immunosuppressive therapies that are much broader. So targeted treatment, unlike older immunosuppressive drugs, is genetically engineered to act like a natural protein in your own immune system. And they are made using biotechnology, essentially. So, okay. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about targeted therapy and how these therapies evolve. So I mentioned interferons are a group of cytokines. Cytokines are proteins that act as intracellular messengers. They carry messages between cells and regulate immune pathways and turn cells on and off. Interferons are known to be very important, and they're known to be upregulated in lupus. So there is, in fact, something called the interferon signature in lupus, which is actually what you're looking at here in this picture. This picture kind of might look, this red and green picture might look like some sort of Christmas themed Rorschach test, but it's actually something called a DNA microarray. If you look carefully, you can see that this picture is actually a giant grid. All across the top, each one of these columns is an individual patient. All across the side here, or down the side here, each of these grids is an individual gene. And the color coding shows whether genes are active or upregulated or inactive. Red genes are upregulated or very active, green are inactive. And what we're seeing here is the group of individuals here on the left side of the picture. These are patients with lupus. The patients on the right side here are healthy people. So hopefully this is where the Rorschach test comes in. You can sort of see that the people who have lupus are very different looking than the healthy controls. These are all interferon genes here running along the side, and you can see that they are upregulated in lupus. So this is sort of what the interferon signature looks like. It looks like a bunch of very active interferon genes in someone who has lupus. And this paper was in this particular publication here was really quite groundbreaking and showed us how important interferon is in lupus. And I wanted to tell you a little bit more about how the interferon signature was discovered and sort of the pathway to an active treatment like anifrolumab. This paper, I think where this picture came from, this figure came from, it's quite old. I think it was 2004 approximately. And again, that showed us how important, then we understood, okay, interferon, we need to look at this in lupus. What actually happened here is this was a collaborative study that enrolled about 3,000 lupus patients from across North America and Europe. And in fact, Caneo centers were part of it. Many centers in Canada, including in Winnipeg, submitted or contributed patients to this, where we contributed the patient profile, what their lupus looked like, and their genetic material to this, to the study to come up with this. And that is, and these lupus patients were compared to 3,000 healthy controls from the same areas. And that's how the interferon signature was identified. And once we knew it was an important mechanism in lupus, this then led to intensive research across the world to try to understand and use it as a target, a treatment target in lupus. And here we are in 2022, at least 15 years later, and we have an approved treatment. And this is often the way treatments are developed. It is complicated and it is time consuming. That is, and it does require a lot of collaborative research. So anifrolumab has recently also been Health Canada approved, and it's FDA approved as well in the US. And it is now undergoing the process to see whether it will go on public formularies. Once again, we are very hopeful. We have had a chance to weigh in, we being lupus investigators across the country. I think Lupus Canada may have also advocated it for it. And we are very hopeful that it will get the green light, because it's one thing to have a drug approved. Health Canada's role is to approve a drug in terms of safety and effectiveness. That doesn't get it paid for. And obviously, these new drugs are often very expensive. So if they don't go on public formularies or private healthcare insurance formularies, then that's not very helpful, because most individuals cannot afford to pay for these on their own. And that's where what we're waiting for right now. This drug is given as a monthly intravenous infusion, and studies showed that skin lupus responded particularly well to this medication. But in addition, it was helpful overall to reduce disease activity, and patients on anifrolumab were able to significantly reduce their prednisone dose. It had a good safety profile, and side effects were generally manageable. There were more frequent viral infections, and that's not really a surprise, because interferon is involved in the immune system in fighting viruses. So if we mess with interferon, we have to be careful. However, they were generally minor infections and well managed. I just want to draw your attention to, something that's been on many slides is here, a new drug, its ability to reduce prednisone dose. That is an important outcome in any new drug for lupus. Anything that lets us use less prednisone is important. We all know that prednisone is a double-edged sword. It often is a lifesaver, and it's an organ saver as well, and it works fast. But it has a very long list of cumulative side effects that build up over time. So as a lupus doctor, our goal is always to try to reduce prednisone and use as little as possible. So when we see a new drug, we want to see, does it let us use less prednisone? And these new treatments have all been helpful that way. Another new lupus drug is called Voclosporin. This one is actually made in Canada, although not yet Health Canada approved, in this strange way the world works. The company that developed this drug is a Canadian pharmaceutical company called Aurinia Pharmaceuticals. This drug is a calcineurin inhibitor. It is a cousin of drugs that are already out there, cyclosporin and tacrolimus, that you may have heard of. These drugs, instead of going after B cells as Belimumab and anifrolumab did, they prevent T cell activation, and which is another important pathway in lupus. When it was added to standard therapy for patients with kidney lupus, those patients had about 4 times the chance of a complete renal remission. Again, what that means is all kidney abnormalities went away and normalized, which is great. Again, reduced the amount of prednisone needed. It was much better tolerated, overall, well tolerated with few serious side effects. And that's actually important because the previous related drugs are not all that well tolerated. They have a lot of side effects. Patients don't like them very much, and they don't work as well. So this drug is, works better and is better tolerated. It's also a pill, as opposed to the other drugs that were given by injection. This one is a pill that's given twice a day, and many patients appreciate that as well. This one has said it's FDA approved, but it has not yet come to Health Canada for approval, and therefore isn't yet available in Canada, even though it was developed by a Canadian company. Unfortunately, we are often behind our larger southern cousins simply because of market size. There are more patients, of course, in the US, and drugs go there first. But we should be getting this one, should be coming up here soon as well. So these are just some that are the newest ones, but there's a whole long list of other drugs that are in the pipeline. And again, this is something that's really new in lupus, that we have all of these things at different stages that are approved, that are undergoing approval, and that are coming further down the pipeline in lupus treatments. There was just a successful, what's called a phase 2 trial of a drug called Iberdomide. This is a drug, it's actually related to thalidomide, which many patients or many people will have heard of, which sounds frightening, but we have known for a very long time that thalidomide was actually quite helpful in lupus and in autoimmune disease, but for obvious reasons, it has not had a lot of uptake. This drug is much safer, although not in pregnancy, and it has fairly broad immune-based effects. And the initial trials showed that it is also helpful in reducing prednisone dose and in controlling lupus overall. Atacicept is another B-cell drug, as are Belimumab and anifrolumab. It is given by subcutaneous injection, and we are just starting phase 3 trials. Hopefully there will be Canadian sites involved in those as well, and also looks very promising in lupus. There is a whole class of drugs called JAK inhibitors that are already out there, which is always nice when we're repurposing a drug that is used for something else for lupus, because then we already know a lot about safety and it's easier to access it. These drugs are in widespread use already for rheumatoid arthritis, for inflammatory bowel disease, for a variety of other autoimmune diseases as well. And they are being intensively studied for lupus, and so far look promising as well. Those are also pills, which is nice. So lots more that are at different stages. So again, this is quite novel and exciting. And you might want to know, why do we need so many? Well, this figure here on the screen is a graphic of lupus pathogenesis. These are all of the pathways within the immune system that are involved in lupus where abnormalities have been shown. There's a lot, as you can see, lots of different targets, and individual people with lupus are going to be different. In some patients, the B-cell pathway that I've mentioned is going to be more important. In others, it's going to be more T-cell. In others, it may be both or a different pathway. So the mechanisms are very complicated. We're not going to get a one-size-fits-all treatment. We're going to continue to need different therapies for different manifestations, for different people, and for different stages of lupus. I think many in this audience may well already be aware that a drug might work for skin rashes related to lupus, but doesn't work for the joints, or it works for the kidneys, but not the heart involvement, or something along those lines. And that's unlikely to change. It's really exciting as these drugs are, there's really no indication that any of them are going to be a blockbuster drug that fixes everything. I wish we had that, but I don't think we're going to get it. The thinking really amongst people who deal with lupus is that we lump it all together because there are certainly things in common with lupus, but that it really is a collection of different diseases that are related, and that we will need it. We are trying to figure out the right treatment for different aspects of this highly variable disease. So we do need lots of options, and we haven't had them. And it is very exciting that we are getting them, hopefully soon. So I'm going to switch gears now completely and talk about something completely different, and that is the microbiome. So the microbiome is something you've probably already heard of. It is the collection of all of the microbes, including bacteria, fungi, and viruses, and their genes, which is important, that naturally and normally, this is normal, live inside our bodies and inside us. So you may have already heard the concept that if you look at all of the cells in the human body, most of them are actually not human cells. There are more non-human cells in our bodies than there are human, and that's the microbiome. It's a really hot topic in autoimmune disease, in lupus as well as in many others, and it's the subject of quite intense research. The gut microbiome is the biggest microbiome. That's the organisms that live in our intestines, in our gut, and it affects human physiology and can affect change in our metabolism as well as in our immune function. And we now know that changes to the gut microbiome are very important in human health and disease pathogenesis. So it's actually important to be aware of this concept of the microbiome. It means that lupus could alter your microbiome, and your lifestyle can also impact on your microbiome. And that particularly, that includes diet, of course, particularly. So changing your microbiome could make lupus better or worse. That gives us two possible avenues for treatment. One is just changing diet, and the other is changing your microbiome directly through supplements. This is like a probiotic type supplement. So this is an intense area of research right now. So the microbiome forms a complex ecosystem that adapts to the individual conditions in which it finds itself. This starts at birth. Your microbiome interacts and changes with your body, and but there's steady interactions between the microbes and the human body, and the microbiome adjusts over time to its habitat. It basically, eventually, the microbiome is identified as part of your body by your body. Your body recognizes it as part of itself, and these interactions are really important in maintaining general health and well-being. It's constantly evolving over time in response to your life, including age, very important nutrition and lifestyle, hormone changes, inherited genes, and of course, disease and medications. So all of these things impact on the microbiome. And because of this, it's a major player in maintaining human health. We have learned that an alteration in the makeup of the human microbiome, so it's called dysbiosis, can lead to serious illnesses. And it's clear that the microbiome induces responses that regulate the immune system and affect immunological tolerance. So immunological tolerance is the function of the immune system that is supposed to help your body differentiate between self and non-self. Your immune system is supposed to be able to tell the difference between a normal healthy cell, between a cell that is damaged, let's say by injury, or a cell that is infected with a virus or a cancer cell. Your immune system needs to be able to tell the difference and leave the healthy tissues alone and go after the damaged or cancerous or infected cells. That process is tolerance. And if that falls apart, we end up with autoimmune disease. Tolerance, sort of ineffective tolerance or alterations to tolerance are one of the, or abnormal tolerance is known to be one of the fundamental processes underlying lupus and other autoimmune diseases. So there is a very important connection between the microbiome and your immune system. So collectively, there's been lots of studies done on the microbiome in lupus. These studies have shown when you compare the microbiome of a lupus patient to that of normal patients, first off, they show reduced bacterial diversity. If you look at microbiome studies, they will give long lists of all of the microbes that were found. That list is shorter for lupus patients. It's not as diverse. And the proportions of the microbes that are known to be protective are smaller. So, and basically these studies are kind of the easy studies. Looking in a cross-sectional way, what does a microbiome in a lupus patient look like? That's kind of easy. These studies basically involve collecting poop samples and analyzing them. Not sure how much fun that is to do, but it's important, and there's it's showing important results. That's the easy parts, though. What we don't know is, does this altered microbiome, so what came first? We don't know that. Does lupus cause the alterations in the microbiome, or does dysbiosis contribute to lupus, as in does the alterations in the microbiome contribute to lupus? We don't really know that yet. So of course, what I mentioned, could diet changes or specific probiotic supplements be a treatment for lupus? That is of course of great interest. So could we do something about lupus in this relatively non-invasive, I don't think it's a simple way, but could we do that? So I think it's important to know that animal studies and early human studies are positive and do suggest that this is going to be an important avenue to treat lupus, as well as other autoimmune diseases. So I just wanted to go through some of the results that we have about the anti-inflammatory diet. This is something I'm sure you've all heard of, and what the evidence is for that in lupus. But I'm going to start with rheumatoid arthritis. It's often rheumatoid arthritis is somewhat more advanced, or rheumatoid arthritis studies are somewhat more advanced than lupus simply because it's more common. So studies are done first in this. But I think it could still be relevant because lupus and rheumatoid arthritis have a lot in common, including alterations that have been shown in the microbiome with similar reduced diversity and reduced protective microbes. So there has been a recent study. This was just presented at the American College of Rheumatology meeting last fall. That's the big American meeting. It was virtual, of course, last year. So it's not published yet, but it's a pilot study of something called the ITIS diet, an anti-inflammatory diet. And these patients, even though it was quite a short study, actually had significant improvements in pain, in disease activity by measures, swollen joints, blood measurements of inflammation like the ESR and CRP. And these also correlated to changes in the microbiome. So they measured the microbiome over time and how it changed before and after this diet, and found that it changed, and along with that, pain and disease activity improved. And another analysis also showed that fatigue improved. And again, coming back to fatigue, which is such an important stubborn symptom for lupus patients, this, I think this is very hopeful that perhaps something like this might be able to result in some improvements here. So what about lupus? What do we know about lupus? Actually, quite a lot. This is a very dense slide, and I'm not going to go through everything, but there are quite a few early studies of many ingredients or diet changes that have been shown to improve aspects of lupus. So one of the things that is you will actually see all of these things have in common. They are elements of an anti-inflammatory type diet. I'm going to pick out one of these here, the fish oil study. Just again, because there's a local sort of component to this. Fish oils, they are generally, you can buy these supplements, and we've known that's omega-3 fatty acids. We have thought for quite some time that these are helpful in reducing disease activity, joint pain, inflammation in people with lupus. Fish oils, usually what people buy, the supplements that people buy over the counter usually come from salmon. There was a study that many Canadian centers were involved in. Because of the existence of the Canios network, we were invited to participate in another network originating in the US called the Lupus Clinical Trials Network. Many Canio centers are now also Lucin centers. Lucin did a study on krill oil. Krill are these little shrimpy things that are actually the producers of omega-3s. Then the salmon eat the krill. So the theory behind this study was that krill oil was really going directly to the source, bypassing the salmon, looking at the krill that that produce omega-3s. The study went and procured a very pure form of krill oil from Norway, which was used for this study, and looked at how fish oil or krill oil supplements might reduce inflammation. The study has just wrapped up. We don't have the results yet, but we are hoping to have that soon. In addition to that, there has been evidence that lots of aspects of your diet, for instance, flaxseed, pumpkin, sunflower, and sesame seeds, have been shown actually to improve kidney function in patients with kidney involvement for lupus. Vitamin D has been shown to increase fatigue. That one was particularly in a pediatric population. And cholesterol has gone down with a higher, in this study, it was actually the opposite. A higher inflammatory diet score showed higher cholesterol levels. So if those patients who had a more anti-inflammatory diet had a lower cholesterol levels. So all of these studies have in common that they take elements of what is known as the anti-inflammatory diet. It's important to know here that none of these changes though are permanent. If you change your diet or add a supplement, that can change your microbiome. But if you revert back to previous habits, then your microbiome will also revert back. What that means is really to improve things, we need sustained long-term changes, which of course is not easy to measure and not easy to do. If you can imagine yourself taking part in a study of diet in lupus, where you are asked to log everything, every ingredient, everything that you eat for months at a time, you can imagine how difficult that is to measure in terms of studies. That's why there has been intense interest in nutrition studies for a very long time from investigators and certainly from patients, but it's a really hard thing to study over a long period of time. And of course, we all know that it's not easy to make permanent positive changes over time. But that is likely what's going to be needed. It's also important to know that, it's not only your diet, other lifestyle habits, exercise, smoking, other things are going to be important, as is medications and comorbidities and such. So this is also not at all simple, but very promising. So what's the anti-inflammatory diet? You may already know it's based on the Mediterranean diet. The Mediterranean diet, first and foremost, avoid processed food. If it comes in a box, if it has on the ingredients things that sound more like a chemistry class than something from your grocery store, that's probably something you want to avoid. The focus for all of these diets that have been shown to be beneficial is on whole grains, fruits, vegetables, and beans, and healthy fats such as olive oil and fish. with reduced or smaller portions of seafood, dairy, eggs, and poultry, and infrequent red meat, avoiding sugary stuff, and small or moderate amounts of alcohol. Bottom line is that higher intake of animal foods, processed foods, sugar correspond to a microbial environment that is highly inflammatory. And really, we have a lot to learn. Some of these studies, including the ITIS diet that I mentioned for rheumatoid arthritis, as well as the, that's also been studied in lupus, where it was found to be related to cholesterol. It's a little bit stricter than the Mediterranean diet in that it also is gluten-free and it's quite low on salt, and it doesn't allow tomatoes or nightshades, and it minimizes dairy and doesn't allow alcohol, whereas the Mediterranean diet actually allows moderate amounts or reasonable amounts of alcohol. Is that needed? We don't know yet. Lots to learn. But there is, I think, overwhelming evidence that this anti-inflammatory diet on principle is highly preventative of a number of diseases. It's also the same diet that you will see touted as the anti-cancer diet, as reduced heart disease and diabetes. And there's a reason for that. Inflammation is involved in cancer and heart disease and diabetes. Inflammation is your body's response to injury, and disruptions in that, or excess inflammation, is increasingly at the root of all evil, it really looks like. So information about this diet is already on, I think, the Lupus Canada website, on the Arthritis Society website, on most other lupus-based websites. There is no lupus-specific diet per se. This is the anti-inflammatory diet, as mentioned, is just in general, has been shown to be likely the healthiest diet. And there's increasing evidence that nutrition, in fact, is really important, and that the over-processed sort of classic Western diet that we have is harmful in a lot of ways. So one last thing I wanted to talk about, and again, this is more about pain and fatigue. I'm switching gears again. We're going to vagus nerve stimulation. And again, because pain and fatigue are such persistent, stubborn, and complicated and difficult to treat symptoms for the lupus patient. So vagus nerve stimulation is about the inflammatory reflex. This is a physiologic mechanism that reduces inflammation in the body. This picture here shows the vagus nerve. It's the yellow squiggles all over the place. You can see that it runs up in the neck, but also innervates an awful lot of organs in the body. The inflammatory reflex can be engaged by stimulating the vagus nerve. And vagus nerve stimulation has been shown to reduce inflammatory markers and has beneficial effects on disease in several animal models of various diseases. So vagus nerve stimulation administered by a surgically implanted stimulator has been shown to be effective and safe in uncontrolled studies in several inflammatory diseases such as rheumatoid arthritis. So what's happening here is that this generator or pulse generator is implanted under the skin, and electrodes go to the vagus nerve and stimulate it. So when I'm saying uncontrolled, that means the studies didn't compare them to people who didn't receive the treatment, which makes it harder to interpret the results. And this has not been studied in lupus. So I was interested to see this one study that looks really good that was done in lupus. And what this study did is it used cutaneous stimulation. And that's because this particular part of the ear here, it's called the cymba concha, is innervated by the vagus nerve, which means that the inflammatory reflex can be engaged by stimulating this area through the skin. So that's non-invasive. You don't need a surgically implanted device to do this. So this study was very elegant, I thought, and it was a randomized, double-blind, sham-controlled pilot trial. What do all those words mean? So the randomized, it means that patients who participated were randomized either to receive the vagus nerve stimulation or placebo treatment. And double-blind means neither the patient nor the investigating physicians knew which patients had received what when they were assessing the effect of the treatment. Sham-controlled means that it was controlled by fake vagus nerve stimulation, essentially. When we do drug trials, we use a placebo treatment. We have a pill that looks identical to the real pill. In this case, it's harder to do with procedures. What they actually did was turn off the machine, the stimulator machine, and told all patients that they may not feel anything, so they weren't surprised if they did. And the vagus nerve here, the lupus patients who had moderate to severe high levels of joint pain were enrolled. The vagus nerve was stimulated using these TENS, essentially, which you may have heard of, transcutaneous electrical nerve stimulation. And even though this was a very short pilot study, they had significant improvements in pain, in fatigue, and disease activity compared to those in the control arm. And they also took blood samples and found that substance P, which is a neurotransmitter and a modulator of pain perception, was reduced in those receiving vagal nerve stimulation. So, and it actually lasted, this isn't something that just happened while they were receiving the treatment, but lasted, this was a short study because it's a pilot study. That means it's the forerunner of hopefully a larger study. It lasted a couple of weeks out, which I think is really interesting because this is non-invasive. This is a non-invasive. It doesn't have really a lot of side effects, and it in just with a very short number of treatments, it showed significant benefit. So I thought that was also very encouraging and another hopeful thing that we may be able to improve symptoms. And I'm going to stop there and see if there's any questions.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Dr. Peschken. We have quite a few comments and messages and questions in the chat box, so I will try to be cognizant of the time as well. But the first question is, I had genetic sequencing done. What gene would be related to cytokines?
So most genes are related to cytokines. First thing to keep in mind about lupus is that almost always lupus is what we call a polygenic disease. There are rare cases in young children of what we call monogenic lupus, but for most people, it's a whole bunch of genes that come together to cause lupus. And these are not abnormal genes, but everybody's a little different in the way they respond to the immune system. And then the things we experience in our lives, which includes everything, infections, stressors, and all of that on top of it can activate genes. If you go think back to that Christmas figure thing that I showed you with active genes, these were not abnormal genes, they were just more turned on. And all of those genes were interferon genes. They're all related to the cytokine interferon. Most genes actually code for either an enzyme or a protein molecule like a cytokine.
Okay, thank you so much. Another question is there a link between having a MTHFR gene mutation and lupus?
Not that I'm aware of.
All right. Also the same question, but in regards to celiac and lupus.
Is there a genetic link? Was that the question?
Yeah. Is there a link between having, I guess, a celiac?
So, yeah, probably. Celiac is also an autoimmune disease. And we do find that there is often some degree of general sort of higher predisposition to other autoimmune diseases. And we not uncommonly see families where there is more autoimmune disease in general, whether it's lupus and rheumatoid arthritis, thyroid disease, type 1 diabetes, other diseases. So there's no direct genetic link, but there may be some linkages in terms of both of them being autoimmune.
Perfect. Thank you. Someone asked about meat, but then saw that you listed poultry on the diet section. And then someone asked if there's any updates in stem cell research, but I don't know if that is a big question, too big of a question, but do you have any thoughts on that?
So a couple of different things for, I'm not sure what was exactly meant by that. There is ongoing research to see if stem cells can be used as a sort of re-engineered as a treatment for lupus, like using a patient's stem cells and engineering them to fight lupus. That's being done in cancer. And it is under investigation in lupus, but isn't really ready for prime time yet. Stem cell transplants are also have been studied for lupus, but and they are there, so that's out there, but again, not that much going on there because it is thought that other treatments may be better.
All right. Thank you. Someone said great information. They're also interested in stem cell research. As someone else said, great information. They also asked about if this would be available to view again. So just to let everyone know, this is being recorded and will be available on our website within the next 24 to 48 hours. And yeah, so for now, that is all the questions we have. Yes, Leanne, if you have anything you would like to say.
Yeah, I'd like to thank Dr. Peschken for such a fantastic presentation. I know I learned a lot and I have a lot more questions myself that I have to allow to resonate. But thank you so much for taking the time, Dr. Peschken, and helping us to help inform those who are affected by lupus. And we really appreciate the presentation that you put together. If there are no other further questions, I think we can say good night. And as Ariana mentioned, this will be available on our website within the next 24 to 48 hours so that you can revisit it and take maybe a longer look at some of the information that Dr. Peschken provided. Wonderful.
You're welcome. I hope it was helpful to everybody.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Peschken. Thank you to everybody who joined us this evening. Thank you, Ariana, for moderating, and we'll hope to see you all at the next webinar in June. Take care, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Bye.
Bye-bye.